Hello. Thank you. Dramatic silence. I just realized there's no real comfortable place for me to go with this microphone now that I've gone behind the things. My name's Jennifer. I work here. Welcome to the Green Space. Who's new? Who's never been here before? Wow. Awesome. How did you all hear about this? Just curious. The radio. Awesome. Well, that gives you a clue about who we are and what we do here. Who listens to WNYC? Many, many. Awesome, awesome. WQXR? Well, a few. Awesome. Well, so we're New York Public Radio. So the Green Space, the studio that you're in right now, is where we welcome people to come in person to be a part of what we do, which is make radio, make podcasts, make video. This is going out live online as video, so people will be able to see it live. And if you want to share it with friends later, you can send them the link. It's on our website, thegreenspace.org. So to that end, we definitely don't want you to silence yourselves during tonight's show at all, but please do silence your phones because we don't want to hear ringing. That said, if you want to take pictures or something like that, that is totally fine. Just don't disrupt other people's experience, which is kind of a good rule in life, right? Not just in theaters. So before we get started, I do want to thank you all for being here tonight. I want to thank everybody that made this night possible. Kia LaBeija's residency here in the Green Space is supported by many philanthropic funders, but it's also supported by everyone who is a member of New York Public Radio. So if you give money to WNYC or WQXR, you're also supporting the work that we do here. So thank you to all of our members and supporters and just coming out tonight to be a part of this. So I'm going to turn it over to Kia, who's going to tell you a little bit more about what's going on. But before I do, one more thing. I hope you saw her art that is in the lobby. And I hope you will also, if you haven't picked up a flyer on your way in for the podcast Blind Spot that we're producing here at WNYC. Is anyone listening to Blind Spot already? Yes. Cool. Okay. If you don't know what I'm talking about, please pick up a postcard on your way out, scan it, give it a listen. If you want to be here tonight for this, I am sure you will be really interested in this show and the journalism that we're doing here at WNYC. So without more from me, let's get on with the show. Here's Kia LaBeija.
Thank you, thank you. Okay, I've realized that I love having a microphone. This is amazing. Thank you everyone for being here tonight to witness this amazing, incredible piece of docu-theater. This is like a totally new term that I just heard of, but I love the term. So what you're gonna be seeing here tonight is actually based on, it's basically just a transcript from actual events. So you'll be hearing voices of actual people, their actual stories being portrayed by people that have very, very closely connected relationships to these stories. This is my residency. Like they said, this is a part of the Blind Spot podcast. The images are in there. Terry McGovern, whose name that you'll hear in the podcast, her pictures are also featured out there, so please check them out on your way out. A couple more events that are happening here that I'm putting on are the Valentine's Day Dance. You should all have a flyer on your tables. It's for Love Positive Women, and Love Positive Women is an initiative started by Jessica Lynn Whitbread. It's for February, Valentine's Day, to celebrate women living with HIV. So let's give it up for women living with HIV. Let's give it up for people living with HIV, all persons living with HIV. But specifically, it's an initiative for women and femmes living with HIV. Visual AIDS makes these beautiful Valentines, and they get sent out to women living with HIV all over the world. And I wanted to do something in person that could be a Valentine's Day dance, so like your favorite, like worst nightmare, but like best dream scenario of middle school Valentine's Day dance is gonna be in here and celebrating women and femmes living with HIV. I don't want to talk too much because I'm very excited to bring on this beautiful cast of folks who, I was sitting here earlier crying, watching the run through, just being honest, and then I was like, oh my God, should I put makeup on? Should I put like mascara on? Then I was like, no, just put lipstick on because you might cry again. And not crying in a way that's, you know, just like, oh, I got boohoo, but just overwhelmed with emotion and overwhelmed with thankfulness of this incredibly thoughtful piece of art that I am very, very grateful and honored to be able to share with you today. So thank you to Ted Kerr and Elizabeth Koke for creating this beautiful piece. And I hope it continues to live in many, many different spaces, and I hope that I can continue to be a part of it. So without further ado, I'd like to present to you, I, of course, was Livid.
Valerie Reyes Jimenez. I am the New York City community organizer with Housing Works, and I have been living with HIV since 1981, even though I didn't get a diagnosis until 1989. I'm a long-term survivor, and incredible to me, next month I will be 59 years old. It is something I never imagined could ever happen, and for me, it's absolutely amazing. So, before we even get into this, let me just say, do you know who helped save my life? Women. Straight women, lesbian women, junkie women, homeless women, badass women like Terry McGovern and Jerry Wells. They fought for us and with us way back then when women didn't get AIDS. They just died from it. The text of the piece you're about to witness comes directly from actual transcripts of activist testimony. You can look at your printed materials, your handouts for more information. Much of what you will hear this evening are the words of Wendy and Mary, two women who were living with HIV in 1992. Their testimony was documented by Nancy, Mary's partner, and saved by Judy. Valerie, was inside that hearing room in the CDC on the day that my HIV-positive sisters were giving their testimony. Wendy passed away in 1994, less than 2 years later. Who knows how long she'd been living with the virus at that point? Unable to get a proper diagnosis and treatment, Nancy and Mary continued to share their lives and activism with each other and the world up until last year. The story goes that they met as roommates in rehab. Mary said to Nancy, "I have to tell you something. I have AIDS." To which Nancy replied, "Well, I have to tell you something. I snore." And the rest is herstory. After 32 years together, they died within a few hours of each other. Isn't that a remarkable love story? So this evening, we will share this text in their memory and in honor of all the women who have lived with HIV and have died from AIDS, including the many who have never even received an AIDS diagnosis before their deaths. So I am now going to take a seat and join the reading as the member of the chorus. However, if at any point something resonates with you and you feel moved, please feel free to clap, wave your hands, snap your fingers, or shout out along with us. But before all that, let's hear from our voice of the present, Tristan Cameron.
Hey everyone. How does a microphone work? I don't know. Hello, my name is Tristan Cameron. I come from as far as the Appalachian Mountains of North Carolina, swam way through the watering holes of Western Massachusetts, to now walk the streets of Brooklyn, absorbing its intrinsic beauty. And here I am now. How about that? Anyone ever heard of the word intrinsic? No? No. It's one of those 10-cent words. I remember when I first learned what that word meant, I was listening to the song Subtle Invitation by Mariah Carey. And yes, I'm a lamb. If you know, you know. So, yes, okay. It means belonging naturally, essential. Or if you look at the ethics definition, a property of anything that is valuable on its own means. When we are born, we belong. We are intrinsic by birth, meaning we are meant to be here without question. However, the systems that exist prior to us spend the rest of our gifted lives trying to tell us otherwise. They are not here of organic origin, but we are. Let's say it together. I am intrinsic, I belong. I am intrinsic, I belong. I grew up as a young queer child in the South, a place riddled with these estranged systems, a place where my mother feared I'd die of AIDS because that's all she knew about queerness. I didn't know at that point in my life what it would take for me to get here, but I soon figured out at what cost. Sadly, nothing has quite prepared me for the last few months. I've thought a lot about what it means to be at this place and time in this world, and what I can possibly offer to a room of people like yourselves who have been undervalued or silenced like I have. There's an intimidation I feel to tell my story, but there's a rageful necessity to do so. We need to hear our history. We need to hear the truth. And we need to hold ourselves accountable to that truth, because only from that can our collective transformation take place. So let's start here. AIDS, acquired immunodeficiency syndrome. A syndrome is medically defined as a set of symptoms and diseases. This set changes, and therefore, the basis for a diagnosis changes. It is the very nature of a syndrome. The definition of a syndrome must be continually changed as new symptoms are identified. But before January of 1993, the medical community's understanding of who could be diagnosed with AIDS was incredibly narrow. In order to be considered a person with AIDS, you had to have a positive HIV test and have a diagnosis of any of the opportunistic infections that the medical community had observed that seemed related to someone's compromised immune system. The problem with this definition is that it was based primarily on experiences of white cis men with HIV. As of 1987, while there was a working definition that included 23 opportunistic infections, it did not include any of the infections that were frequently seen in cis women and other people with vaginas or front holes or injection drug users, such as bacterial pneumonia, TB, stage 3 cervical cancer, and recurrent vaginal candidiasis, aka yeast infections.
By 1989, activists had enough.
Enough! When women with AIDS are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
When women with AIDS are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back!
When women with AIDS are under attack, what do we do?
Stand up, fight back! We began putting pressure on the Centers for Disease Control to change the definition. The CDC was open, but their idea was to drop all opportunistic infections and just go with a positive HIV test and a T-cell count below 200. This oversimplification was rejected by activists and people in the medical community alike. Instead, we were calling for a more robust list of opportunistic infections that better reflected the diversity of people with the virus who were being denied an AIDS diagnosis.
We wanted to be included.
The stakes were high.
We want to be included.
The change in definition was not about semantics for those involved.
We want to be included.
An AIDS diagnosis mattered for many reasons. It could get someone into a drug trial, providing hope and maybe life-saving medication. And it would make someone eligible for support benefits. Benefits would be particularly meaningful for women with children.
We're worried about the burden our deaths could have on our families.
It's also about ensuring that someone's suffering and premature death does not go unnoticed. Women and drug users dying of AIDS wanted to know that our lives and deaths matter. We want to be included in the history of this plague. One of the strategies to push for a more inclusive AIDS definition was done by activist and jailhouse lawyer Katrina Haslip from inside Bedford Hills Prison. Together, and activist and lawyer Terry McGovern, then working at MFY Legal Services. Together, they launched a class action lawsuit against the Social Security Administration, which they argued was inappropriately using the exclusionary CDC definition of AIDS to deny resources to people living with HIV without an AIDS diagnosis. Demonstrations and protests are another strategy. On a stormy and wet December 4th in 1990, over 100 activists were arrested at the CDC headquarters in Atlanta, where hundreds of protesters from across 30 states demanded a change in the definition. And the voice of women with HIV could not be avoided or dismissed. Among us was Carrie Duran, a woman living with HIV, who yelled,
I'm 28 years old and I'm dying and no one gives a shit. Get off your asses and do some work.
The CDC was forced into holding a public hearing about the definition, which finally occurred in the fall of 1992. In attendance to testify were not only CDC officials, but also doctors who were actually treating women living with HIV and women living with HIV, whose travel and accommodations was covered not by the CDC, but by the community, who knew that the women had to be present. To start the day off, a CDC spokesperson said,
"There are diverse opinions on the most efficient and beneficial guidelines for this expansion. Still, everyone in attendance has one thing in common: the dedication to the prevention of the spread of HIV and dedication to helping provide the best information and services for those already infected. We are here today to hear what those in the community have to say. Today, we will determine the definition of AIDS."
After CDC representatives and members of the medical community went back and forth about the possible single use of T cells to determine an AIDS diagnosis, the testimonies began.
Our next speaker will present an individual perspective. Wendy Alexis Modesty.
I've waited over 2 years for this opportunity. 2 years for a woman living with HIV/AIDS in America is a lifetime. In this, the second decade of AIDS, it is ludicrous that we are still discussing that HIV manifests itself gynecologically in women. How can anyone be so absurd as to say that pelvic inflammatory disease that occurs every time that a woman menstruates, with pain so bad that when it's happening she faints, is not debilitating enough to be considered life-threatening? In 1986, I had a yeast infection that became so aggravated that my clitoris was so swollen it hung below my vaginal lips. There was no physician that could give me comfort. I now get yeast infections every month.
You look at me sideways and I'd get a yeast infection.
Me too, every fucking month.
They're not the kind where you see those pretty women sitting comfortably on couches in advertising for over-the-counter brand cures. You know what I'm talking about. Mine are so severe, I cannot sit, stand, or lie down comfortably. The itching and burning becomes so intense that I cannot sleep, and if I do fall asleep, I sometimes scratch myself, which leads to other infections that are generally treated with antibiotics, and then I get the yeast infections again. I find it suspect that although vaginal yeast infections have been around for ages, it is precisely at the time that female AIDS activists begin to apply pressure to the CDC to get the word out that chronic vaginal yeast infection is a sign of HIV infection in women, that pharmaceutical companies suddenly come out with an over-the-counter cure. Now, women can quietly cure themselves at home, alleviating the responsibility of the medical community and letting the CDC off the hook.
Makes sense to me.
Think about it.
Think about it.
Between 1984 and 1987, I had 6 hospitalizations for recurrent bacterial pneumonia. 2 of these coupled with endocarditis again. In 1988, I presented with cervical dysplasia. I want to note that on each one of these hospitalizations, I was discharged. I was also homeless, actively an intravenous drug user, and selling myself by having unprotected sex in exchange for my drug. No one ever bothered to ask me to get tested for HIV.
Me neither.
In 1990, I had to have a hysterectomy due to cervical cancer. The day of my hysterectomy, I was finally diagnosed HIV positive. And the only reason I was tested is because I told my surgeon that my ex-boyfriend had tested positive a month before. I am in no way unique. Recurrent bacterial pneumonia, cervical cancer, chronic vaginal yeast infections, and pulmonary tuberculosis are more common than not in HIV-positive women. If I, a lay person, know this, then how can the CDC, who set policy for this entire nation, not know this? The horror of your neglect is that unfortunately other countries throughout the world use the CDC definition for an AIDS diagnosis. Common sense tells you if your definition is based on tests done primarily on men, then it won't reflect the reality of women. The point is that we are just being treated and discharged. The result of that indifference on the part of the CDC is at very least a cofactor in the continued spread of HIV infection in the United States. But the CDC can accept the full blame for the swiftness with which women die once they are diagnosed, since we go largely untreated and undiagnosed until death. How long will women literally continue to die in the streets of every city, country, county, and town, and on the roads of our rural and farming communities in the mountainous regions? How long, I ask you, how long must our Native American women suffer on reservations without getting help or proper treatment because we all go undiagnosed? Women are not some special population. We are an integral and vital part of humanity, equal and necessary. How long must the women of America be expected to support a government that ignores us, finds our complaints not important, and our diseases not threatening enough? How many of us must suffer needlessly until the CDC allows the definition to include those diseases that are specific to women? It's strange to live in a country that first, due to my race, then my gender, and then my economic, and now my health status, considers me unnecessary. Your message seems to be that we'll let you all talk and then hopefully you'll get tired enough and sick enough to be quiet. Well, let me tell you, think again.
Think again, think again, think again.
My HIV positive sisters and I will continue to fight for as long as it takes to be a visible and vocal lesion in the side of the CDC policymakers until we are treated equally by having our lives and our health considered as important as those of men. I leave you with these words so that every time you hear my voice or see my face, you'll know that I am holding you accountable and you responsible for the unnecessary suffering of women the world over. I will not distort my voice. I will not cover my face. And I certainly will not live the remainder of my life hiding in shadows. My name is Wendy Alexis Modesty, and I am a proud Afro-American woman who, despite the CDC, is living with AIDS in Syracuse, New York.
Next, another speaker presenting from an individual perspective, Mary Lucy.
I want to open by saying thank you to the CDC for inviting me here to speak today. Because as a woman infected with HIV, I have a lot to say. And I probably won't be invited back. Before I was diagnosed, I suffered with bacterial pneumonia and recurring vaginal candidiasis. I did not respond to treatment for 8 months. It was only after my HIV diagnosis that my doctor started me on the proper course of treatment. I know that HIV works differently in my body than in a man's body, and I grow increasingly tired of trying to prove it. I do not want to continue to rely on information which was obtained from bodies different than my own. This is not merely idle talk on women's issues. This hearing will have a profound impact on my survival.
This hearing will have a profound impact on my survival.
Currently, we make health decisions by comparing our symptoms with other women in our support groups, and we struggle to help each other find gynecologists who are HIV literate. we are forced to rely entirely on our own observations. Current tracking of AIDS is criminally inadequate. There is an abundance of evidence to warrant the inclusion of cervical cancer in the CDC definition. Additionally, cervical disease caused by HPV is the most serious and life-threatening gynecological disease for HIV-infected women. But to date, CDC policymakers remain unwilling to include cervical cancer because that would increase the scope and cost of the epidemic. These individuals are dreadfully negligent, nothing more than money-hungry mongers of death.
Greedy bastards.
This is a ludicrous obstruction of urgently needed research and funding. Many notable researchers routinely document cervical disease in women with HIV, yet fear that publicly stating their findings will be perceived as bucking the system, and the reality is their funding will be jeopardized. Our doctors look to the CDC definition to detect and treat our illnesses, and unless cervical cancer is listed, women who seek treatment for HIV will not be examined for cervical disorders because our doctors won't know to look for it. Nobody knows we're sick because the list of illnesses that clinicians and patients are told will occur in HIV-infected people is fraudulently incomplete. No matter how long you delay, no matter how much money it costs, no matter what arguments you present, you will never make the virus fit into your definition of AIDS. You must make the definition fit the virus. Year after year, our symptoms are repeatedly overlooked. This eliminates our opportunity for treatment, especially preventative treatment, and it drastically decreases our chances for survival. Many people don't know that most women with HIV/AIDS do not get KS. And the current proposed inclusion of T cells is irrational and short-sighted. It will not reflect the clinical reality of AIDS in women. The most common scenario in an AIDS diagnosis is where a person feels perfectly healthy and then suddenly comes down with pneumocystis pneumonia as the AIDS-defining illness. At this point, it's too late to prolong life. AIDS is too often not detected in women until we get pneumocystis and die. And when women die without an AIDS diagnosis, our suffering is needlessly intensified because we die without treatment or care. Yet, a more revolting and offensive fact is that we die without being counted. As if our lives didn't mean anything. Don't our lives count? Then count our deaths.
Our lives count.
Count our deaths.
Our lives count.
Count our deaths.
Our lives count.
Count our deaths.
A more inclusive definition will alert practitioners that HIV infection may be involved if a woman is not responding to treatment. It would lead to early detection and survival. Young women who ask their doctors for an HIV test will be less likely to be misdiagnosed or dismissed as simply neurotic. Why is there a higher standard for the inclusion of diseases that affect women? Historically, women have been and continue to be told by doctors that our physical ailments are all in our heads. Distinguished doctors, scientists, policymakers, listen and hear me when I tell you, AIDS is not in my head, it's in my veins. I am appalled and disgusted at policymakers and bigots who argue that women will become hysterical and panic. Women demonstrate their ability to handle life's truths on a daily basis. We are capable of making decisions based on accurate information. It is asinine that the definition of AIDS has not kept pace with the changes in our understanding of the epidemic nor the epidemic itself. This is pure idiocy. But it does not surprise us that a healthcare system that has long remained blind to the healthcare needs of women choose to ignore us now. We urge you to correct this absurd and hideous imbalance. We urge you to act forcefully, dramatically, immediately. To do so is both morally and scientifically responsible. We are painfully aware that President Bush doesn't want an increase in AIDS cases to be his responsibility of his administration, But we must go beyond politics
Mary was
and
cut
concentrate
off.
on quality science. Our lives depend on it.
Her microphone was silenced in the middle of a sentence. Of course, this did not stop Mary. She contended that she was an invited speaker and that she had come a long way to make this presentation.
You people don't know what goes into our community. You have no idea what we have to deal with living with this disease. You have the audacity to turn my microphone off?
I, of course, was livid and could not contain myself. Before I tell you what happened after Mary spoke, I will tell you what I wish I had said. We know our words are harsh and our accusations are pointed, but you must look at the reality of the lives of women who are sick and dying to understand where the sentiments come from. However, I am not one to be eloquent or poised in a volatile situation. Instead, I flew out of my chair and shouted at the moderators to turn the fucking microphones back on. The women in the audience responded with shouts of,
Keep going, Mary.
Keep doing it.
Do
Have
it
your
for all
say.
the infected
Do
women.
it.
and then began the chant.
Let her talk.
Let her talk. Let her talk. Let her talk. Let her talk.
Let her talk.
Last January, 2023, I was in the hospital for severe dehydration due to chronic diarrhea, fever, and body aches. They gave me every test imaginable that day, including a chest x-ray. The only thing missing was STI testing. No blood was drawn. I didn't think to ask, but then again, why should I have to? That was the moment I realized the first crack. I laid there for hours, at one point in my own waist, pressing the button for a nurse to help me to the bathroom. But no one came. The second crack. Several hours later, they actually told me they didn't know what was wrong with me. It was probably just some neurovirus. Inconclusive, my only souvenir was a hospital bracelet that I now have saved in a drawer, tucked away with a life I don't recognize any longer. They sent me home with some anti-diarrheal medication, and that's it. I was bedridden for the next week, lost probably 10 pounds because I couldn't eat, and I'll never know if that was the beginning, the final crack that would deteriorate my whole reality, but only months after. July 2023, I celebrated my 27th birthday at the beach. It washed all over me, all of it. I was overcome with the salt and the sand and what I embraced as a turning point in my life. I didn't know what was coming. All I knew that day was to fight for my life and bathe in the green algae, drape myself in the coarse seaweed like a dress, while the grit of the rocks scuffed my thigh and ass, making me bleed. I was marked that day. Later that month, I experienced that same great sickness, more manageable than at the beginning of the year. This time I didn't have to go to the hospital, but I felt as if every cell in my body was fighting for its life, and I was barely hanging on. August 2023. I had just moved to a new apartment. Didn't know until the day before if I would have a place to stay. The day I moved, I actually didn't even have enough money to pay for a U-Haul. My partner and I used the last dollars to our name to make it happen. I was newly diagnosed with HIV, working 2 days a week in Cobble Hill and floating in darker waters than before. Those first few days and weeks were a complete blur. I don't know if I felt anything. I didn't know how to. The day I was officially diagnosed, I went to the nearest urgent care to clarify my results. They had called me the day prior with an automated message that felt definite. I sat in that waiting room with my boyfriend. I felt quiet. Even with the sound of children screaming, I felt a silence wash over me. But in my mind, I screamed, now I have to tell everyone. Who can I tell? What do I do? Then I paused. I can never tell my mother. There's something about comfort in that time that you need it. It's almost as if your body rejects it. You're too overtaken by the shock and the numbness. When I went back to that cold room, I remember the nurse attempting to give me her words. Wherever they landed, I can't tell you. You're not gonna die. People survive this thing now. That didn't make me feel better. The words you want to hear aren't the words that will save you. It's what you tell yourself after. I didn't cry until I came to my lover's embrace. Afterwards, we went to Buffalo Wild Wings, but I got a cheeseburger. They say that grief comes in stages, but I think it's a Rolodex. A long list of names you can flip through, pull a card out, and try to find something inside yourself to blame and simultaneously preserve. I felt as if I did this to myself. Months prior, I would go on sexual benders, having reckless encounters in order to satiate my growing sadness. I didn't get tested. I don't know why. Honestly, I didn't care about myself at that time. Later, I thought, this is what I get. Perhaps my mother was right. I didn't know what I was doing, and being someone who has always been self-sufficient and stubborn out of survival, I had never felt so low, so helpless. You see, you're given a truth, but no one tells you what to do with it afterwards. Their only support is that it's not like it used to be. To me, it felt worse in some ways. Caseworkers, case managers, blood, Biktarvy, HRA, unemployment, and cash assistance. The same script, a different face. So many obstacles, appointments, documentation, pleading, asking, wanting, dreaming. At times, death felt more peaceful than navigating the bureaucratic bullshit that is the American healthcare and social services systems. Is there help? Yes. Is it equitable? No. Therein lies the problem. We can't let our brothers, our sisters, our families slip through these cracks. If I didn't have people in my immediate corner that would listen to me and acknowledge my pain and allow me the space to process, I would have given up. Sorry. I'm still learning how not to give up. We need one another. We need to keep fighting. We need to keep loving. Our queerness, our lives, our humanity depends on it. We deserve to be illuminated, not contained, not allowed assistance, only when we ask for it. Ooh, thank God I put this in here. Let's all take a breath. Okay. Breathe in. And out. Ooh. Can I tell you a secret? This is my first time disclosing my status to a group of people that I don't know. I've only told a handful of close friends and loved ones, all of whom do not have HIV. I've written letters, I've made my rounds, I've deliberated about the perfect time to disclose my status publicly because that's what's expected. We're supposed to make our pain, even more than our joy, accessible to others. I've been told that one day I will forget that I have HIV, that it will disappear from my immediate consciousness. It's something I have, but it's not the entirety of who I am. But I don't want to forget it. There's so much we have lost, so much I am learning and unlearning, and I never want that journey to end. For me, it has been 5 months of what might be a lifetime. It's been 5 months of a life that is beginning again and again and again. Still unemployed, still recovering, still aimless, and yes, still here. Out of all of this, fighting the powers that be inside and out, you know what I wish that I could do. Tell my mother, but I have all of you instead, hearing me, listening. Feels like that silence I spoke of before. But the one thing you can't answer for me is that one question I so desperately want to hear. Do you still love me now that you know?
Yes. We love you.
Before I am an artist, I am a lover, and I'm with you as you are with me, and I love you. I wanted to share with you a song, let's see, that has come to mean more to me than I ever thought it ever could. I hope you never stop conquering the world in love, you and I. Here we are on earth together, it's you and I. And God has made us fall in love again, it's true. And I've really found someone like you. Will it stay, this love you feel for me? Will it stay, that you will be here by my side to see me through until my life is through? Conquer the world, oh, in love, you and I, you and I, you and I. I'm glad, at least in my life, I found someone that made, sorry, I forgot the word, but to see me through. But I have found someone in you. My only prayer is that I have shown you a brighter day, because that's all that I'm living for, you see. And don't worry what happens to me. Because in my mind, and you will be here always, always in love, oh, you and I, you and I, oh, you and I.
what I mean? It's still like, damn, ooh, wow. So at the end of the hearing, and after 4 years of persistent hard work, and even though they had no more information at the end of the hearing than they had at the beginning, those at the CDC announced that they had been convinced they needed to broaden the definition of AIDS to be more inclusive of the symptoms affecting women. These phenomenal women began to pave the way for others like me who followed in their footsteps and kept fighting. When Katrina Haslip found out that the CDC was going to change the definition, she was in the hospital near death. In fact, she died only a short time later. Yet, when a reporter asked her how she felt about the fact that the government had changed the definition of AIDS, do you know what that incredible woman said? She said, "The government didn't change the definition of AIDS, we did. We did. And it's not enough. We want and need more."
Yes. One more time for everyone in the room, please. And one time for everybody not in the room, please. My name is Ted, and I'm very grateful that you are all here. Thank you very much. I've forgotten what we're going to say right now, Elizabeth. Do you remember?
Yes. Thank you all for joining us. On your tables, in your program, there is some more information, resources, some discussion questions. And so we're going to stick around for a little while. We invite you to have a conversation with the folks you're sitting with. Maybe have another drink. I think we can still do that. And join us on Valentine's Day. And thank you very much, Kia.
And give it up for Kia.
Oh, please actually don't give it up for me. Give it up to Green Space for having us and having us in their space. And I would just especially like to say thank you, Tristan, because as you got to see these beautiful human beings read these testimonies, you got to allow Tristan to give them their testimony. So yes. I just want to say thank you. And oh my God, that voice! I didn't know it was coming. I saw them rehearsing earlier, but they were like, "Oh, we don't have time for the song," and so I was sitting back there in the song. Oh my God, it's so soulful, beautiful. But yes, thank you all. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for sharing. Love you all. Good night.